I actually think it's a little bit worse than racist. I think it is imperative for me as a Home Secretary, for us as a Labour Party, to want to help people and persuade them that actually they should move back towards a patriotism that we can all unite around. I think the levels of anti-Muslim hatred at the moment are off the charts. I wouldn't want to be South Asian or a Muslim anywhere else.
Shabana, who were you trying to convince and what were you trying to convince them of this afternoon?
I think the message I have is a message for everyone in the hall and people across the country. So what I have in my mind is ordinary British people up and down the country. And the argument I'm making is that I feel that we are at a real pinch point in our life as a country where there are many people who have started as patriots, just as I am, but who have now gone on this journey towards something that is much darker, a bit more divisive, and looks and feels a lot more like ethno-nationalism. And the argument I'm making is there are some people that we will never, ever be able to convince. And we shouldn't try to, because their worldview is completely different. And in my worldview, they deserve to be condemned, and there's no conversation to be had. But there is a much bigger number of people who are just on that journey. And I think it is imperative for me as a Home Secretary, for us as a Labour Party, to want to help people and persuade them that actually they should move back towards a patriotism that we can all unite around, that can speak to all of us, in which I have a place, as well as people who trace their roots back in this country over 1,000 years. And so it's a bigger argument about the sort of country that we are. But I'm also acknowledging that in order to do that persuading, there are conditions that have to be met. And those conditions are about having secure borders, a fair migration system, and safe streets. And I think that if we can create those conditions, then we can unlock the essential nature of the vast majority of the British people, which is to be open, tolerant, and generous.
And in your speech, you acknowledge that some of the things that you might have to do in order to ensure the security of our borders might prove unpopular with the Labour Party and Labour supporters. What were you thinking of? What do you think may be areas where, in order to do the right thing, you will have to ask your party to recognise that it may have to embrace some uncomfortable truths?
Well, I think that we need a response that can speak to the scale of the problem that we have. I don't think that we're in a position where tinkering with the system, changing a few small rules here and there on, indefinite leave to remain or a particular type of work visa, I don't think that's going to speak to the nature of the crisis that we have. It's a crisis that's driven primarily by illegal migration, but there are concerns about legal migration as well, particularly the numbers that we've seen in recent years. And I think that for all of us on the left of politics, we prefer to start the story when we're talking about migration about the contribution that people make and our openness as a country, and the fact that we have been so welcoming to so many people for so long. And I have a personal interest in that. My family came to this country. My granddad and my dad, when he was just a teenager, late 60s, early 70s, my mum in the late 70s. Our story of being English and British starts only a few decades ago. And in the Labour Party, rightly, we want to start with that welcome rather than a message that might feel a bit more difficult. But I think that is to miss out on the essential other half of that positive story. And you need both in order to persuade people across the country. And so what I'm looking at, as I spoke about in my speech, is introducing much more formal element of contribution into the way in which we grant settled status in this country going forwards. Maybe it takes longer, so we've already announced going from 5 years to 10. We're going to consult on a broader range of tests that have to be met. And I think sometimes people might feel that adding conditionality maybe creates 2 tiers of citizenship potentially, or it's asking too much of people. But what I would say is, firstly, I think it's right that as a country we decide that, before you are allowed to remain here for good, here's some things that you have to do. And it's a two-way street. There's a reciprocal relationship that's being created here. But I actually also think it's really important for the people that are coming and wanting to make this country their home, because integration is a really important thing, not just for everyone else that's welcoming someone in, but for that person too. because in this country, I would want people who have come here, made their life here, are going to contribute till the end of their days to unlock their full potential. And I don't think you can do that unless you also are able to show that you have integrated. So it's a two-way street. I think we often talk about one half of the story, and I think we need to talk about the whole story.
The biggest level of legal migration that this country has ever faced happened under the Tories, in a government of which I was part, the so-called Boris wave. Why do you think that happened?
I should probably ask you, Michael.
Very good point.
You tell me, this is an in-conversation. I mean, it is quite surprising. I think that one of the messages that people heard, take back control, I think the emotional tenor of that message during the Brexit years wasn't, we're just going to be in control of it. It was that numbers would come down. And of course, maybe if Boris was here, he would be saying, well, no, we were in charge. It's our sovereign right to make the argument that more people should be allowed in. I think what's gone wrong is, firstly, the care work visa in particular has been open to such abuse. And actually, my constituents in Birmingham Ladywood were onto that like a shot. They could see dodgy care providers being set up by individuals, involved in organised criminality, and they'd shut those companies down and then set up new ones just to keep evading Home Office enforcement. So I sort of knew about that long before, actually, it was making the news more nationally and also being talked of across Whitehall. So people I represent saw that problem. And then you can't really say you've taken back control. When in fact, you've created a route that is open to such abuse that in fact 710,000 people have come on that care work visa. And I've met some people who applied for that visa and got it and did come through some of these dodgy care providers. They sold everything that they had back at home. They've sold all their ancestral land. They've sold all the family jewellery. They've given everything up just to come to this country to work, not realising that the care company they were coming to work for didn't really exist. And so you can't take back control and then actually not have good enough, strong enough rules that you've enforced. And I think that's what's gone horribly wrong here.
There are many reasons, I think, why the take back control promise wasn't fulfilled in the way, you're right, that so many people expected that it would be. One of them was, of course, the ability of the Home Office to deliver. And the Attorney General made the point earlier today that the Home Office hadn't even sent the right lawyers, hadn't even sent any lawyers to some of the asylum tribunals. Do you think that the Home Office, as it currently is fit for purpose?
I believe you me, a few lawyers have had a hairdryer from me in the first couple of weeks in this job. And I think there'll be a bit more of that to come. I don't think it's fully fit for purpose yet. I think that if you were talking to the Permanent Secretary at the Home Office, Antonia Romeo, who's only been in post for 5 months, I think she would say it's a work in progress, making sure that the Home Office is fighting fit on every front. So making sure we've got the right people and the right internal systems, that's going to be a big job of work to do. And since I've been in post, believe you me, a lot of people have told me about all the issues they've had with the Home Office. Many a former Home Secretary has already messaged me with their war stories and their scars. So I know I've got to sort that out. But actually, it's not just about the right people, the right systems, the right internal processes. It is about the culture as well. And when I came into post, I did say, look, I always bring my A game to the table. That's the ask I have of myself. Wherever I am, I have to give nothing less than 100%, and I expect the same of all of you. And if you do that, we'll get on fine. And that is my ask of everybody. They've got to work quick, and they've got to work to the political position and trajectory that I am setting, because that is my job as the politician. And if I've asked for something, I expect it to be produced, and it's fine to tell me I can't do exactly what I want, but it has to withstand scrutiny, and I have to be able to scrutinise. So I think at the moment it's not set up to really allow the politician to add the value that only the politician can add, and that's something I've got to obviously make sure doesn't happen going forward.
I completely agree with you that sometimes it's the case that politicians don't stress that they have agency and that it's the responsibility of the civil service to justify why action can't be executed. There have been successful Labour Home Secretaries in the past. Is there one, are there any, which are models?
Oh, good question. So I would say two. Can I have two?
Absolutely.
So I think Roy Jenkins, I mean, he was a reforming Home Secretary. He got a lot of stuff done. And I also want to be and will be a reforming Home Secretary. So I think he's a good role model just for sheer will and, you know, force of nature, ability to get stuff done. So I definitely think he's a role model. He also, I think, was famously a sort of man that would put away a bottle of claret every lunchtime. I can manage a can of Coke Zero, but in other respects, I think we are similar. But the person I think I have most in common with is David Blunkett.
Yes.
So, you know, he comes from a communitarian Labour tradition, as do I. His faith is a big part of his politics. He's a Methodist. I'm a Muslim. So I think he's the person that I can see more of my politics in, and he's definitely an inspiration to me.
We might turn to faith in just a second, but of course in making the case that you are on migration, as you said, it's a balance case. There's an acknowledgement of contribution, but there's also a recognition that numbers need to be brought under control. Obviously, the migration debate has been driven, as your speech made clear, by Nigel Farage and also by broader agitation on our streets. On Sunday, the Prime Minister said that he thought that Nigel Farage's policies on indefinite leave to remain were racist. Is that language that you think is helpful and accurate?
I actually think it's a little bit worse than racist. If it was racist, in a funny way, it would be easier to deal with. I think it's immoral, and I think it's extreme. And I think Nigel Farage is playing the trick that I think he tries to play very regularly, which is he will say something that technically he can say is not racist, but what he really knows he's done is blown a very, very loud dog whistle to every racist in the country. And I think that means he can always sort of claim plausible deniability and say, well, you know, technically my policy on ILR, for example, ripping up indefinite leave to remain for people who've been in this country for many years, he'll say, well, that will apply to white people as well as non-white people, and technically that would be true. But he also knows he sent a very clear signal to every racist in the land that those who have made their homes in this country, who've come from other places, might one day have their status ripped up. And once you go down that road, of course, why would you stop at indefinite leave to remain? Why wouldn't you say to Britons who've been born in other parts of the world, but who've made their lives here, who have a British passport, who are citizens and nationals just like us, why wouldn't you take it away from them as well? I think he knows exactly what he's doing, and it's a much more cynical, much more dangerous form of politics. I think it's much, much worse than racism.
And there are some people who detect in the rhetoric on migration at the moment more than just racism. They detect a particular animus towards British Muslims. And of course that's been reflected in some of the rhetoric from the White House and the way in which, for example, Sadiq Khan, as Mayor of London, has been accused of implementing Sharia law on the streets of our capital. And there are many other examples as well. Do you think that at the moment, one of the most pernicious forms of racism is anti-Muslim hatred, and what should be done about it?
Well, this one obviously cuts very deep and very personally. I think the levels of anti-Muslim hatred at the moment are off the charts. It's at a scale that I've never known in my lifetime. And, you know, when I was a child, I think I was 7 or 8 years old, that's the first time I heard the word Paki in the school playground. So it's not as if I haven't been racially abused before. It's not like I haven't missed out on things before and I've known it's because, you know, I'm a Muslim. And it's not like I haven't, you know, I haven't faced hatred, but what is happening now is something much deeper and much more pervasive, and it does feel like it's everywhere at the moment. Members of my own family, just in the last couple of weeks, you know, a handful of them have been called fucking Paki in Birmingham, in places that I go to regularly with my family where we hang out, and I can't pretend to you that it doesn't make me have sleepless nights. You know, there's some parts of Birmingham I'm sort of second-guessing whether I can go back to. Again, many, many years ago, when we were children, my dad took us, we lived in Small Heath in Birmingham, and he took us to Sutton Park. And Sutton is like at the nice end of Birmingham, and we thought we were having a great day out, going from, inner Birmingham to outer Birmingham. If you know anything about Birmingham, you feel like you need a passport to go from inner Birmingham to outer Birmingham. And we'd had a little family picnic that my mum had made, and it was all 6 of us, both my mum and dad and my siblings and me. And a bunch of white lads just called us fucking packy, like non-stop. And my dad said, right, we're going to go home. And we were in the park for like 5 minutes. And we didn't go to Sutton Park for another 30 years. And so, when you are abused like that, and especially when your children are around you, it does create a reaction. And it does make your world smaller, and it does make you think twice about those things. And I think that is happening so much more, and it's one of the reasons why I'm making the argument that I'm making, because it will be easy to just step back and say, I'm going to condemn that, and we're very good on the left of politics of showing solidarity and sort of speaking the language of solidarity and showing physical solidarity with those who are under attack. And I love that about the Labour Party and the way that the left feels comfortable doing that. But I'm also not willing to write off potentially millions of my fellow citizens in this country as Muslim haters. Like, I feel like there's a responsibility to reach across to people to work out why that's happening and where it can be answered because they've lost faith in the country, for example, to meet the test that they're setting. Won't work for everybody, and that is the point I was making in my speech. But this is my home. This land is my land. It's the only land I have. I haven't got anywhere else in the world to go back to. This is it for me. And I therefore have a responsibility, I think, from the position I sit in politics, to chart a different course for the country and to make a bigger argument that can stem that tide of hatred, but that also provides a route back for people. People turn to hatred in moments of anger and despair. And when they do that, I do think there's a moral responsibility to provide that path back. And that's what I would like to do.
It's been reported that in the debate about how to deal with prejudice, you have concerns about a statutory definition of Islamophobia. So do you believe that existing laws, properly applied by an energetic police force, can deal with the expressions of prejudice that you have so movingly outlined affect you, your family, and so many other people?
I think it's imperative that whatever legal provisions we have, whether they're new ones or the current ones, that they retain the confidence of the public and that they are capable of meeting the rising tide of anti-Muslim hatred. And I think you're actually seeing this play out in different communities as well. So the Jewish community at the moment, they would also say rightly that the levels of anti-Semitism feel like they're off the charts as well. So that it is a difficult thing for a government to work out how you navigate this space, because a lot of our current campaigning and the answers and solutions that people are coming up with at the moment is about providing specific solutions for specific communities. And that might be, in the end, the right answer. We have a working group that's looking at the definition on Islamophobia, and I think they should be given the chance to report before we think about what they've recommended. But it might be the case as well, actually, that everyone is safer when you're all subject to the same law, and that there's just a deeper understanding amongst our public services, our police and our local councils about how hatred presents itself, when it's towards the Jewish community or Muslims or Sikhs or other groups as well. So I would say that it's imperative that whichever solution you come to, it actually does the job, firstly, but that what it doesn't do is actually create further conditions that increase hatred rather than deal with it, because then people feel like one group's getting special treatment against another group, and also that now their freedom of speech has been curtailed, and they might not have said it 2 weeks ago, but they're definitely going to say it now because it's been taken away from them. Yeah. And so that the public confidence point, I think, there is also crucial. It's crucial because we believe in freedom of speech, but it's actually crucial if you want to keep communities safe as well.
Having the ability as a politician to be able to recognise what's good in your party and its tradition, but at the same time to recognise that sometimes those instincts need to be scrutinised. That's not universal. So naturally, one of the things that's essential to the Labour tradition, as you've pointed out, is that sense of solidarity and sympathy with those who appear to be or are being persecuted. During the whole question of gender identity, the Labour Party its leadership appeared, and please push back if you think this is wrong, to be concerned about the persecution of trans people in a way that didn't take full account of the concerns of many women. Do you think that characterization is fair? And do you think Labour is in a better position now?
So I would say that actually on that issue, it's not a Labour-specific problem. I think actually you saw the same phenomenon in the Conservative Party, in the Liberal Democrats, in the Green Party as well, where you've had this huge clash between those who've come now to be described as gender-critical feminists and trans rights campaigners. I think that's quite an interesting phenomenon that it's happened actually across both the right and the left of politics. But it definitely comes from this sort of desire to not heap more pressure on what is already a small community that are feeling very scrutinised, degraded and dehumanised. And I think it's actually a failure of the whole of mainstream politics because in my mind, the obvious thing is that it should not be difficult to show people in the trans community that the rights they have, anti-discrimination and so on, the ability to live their lives free from discrimination are absolutely sacrosanct. But that cannot come at the expense of the rights of women and girls to sex-segregated spaces. And in my mind, that's a balance. And that balance and how you strike that balance is something to be debated. It is something to be negotiated. And in the end of that, you come to a settlement that reconciles the differences between two communities whose rights are clashing. And the fact that mainstream politics across all the big parties wasn't really able to meet that challenge, I think actually shows something bigger is happening in our politics. Because we're in an era where people say no debate, or we're in an era where being intransigent and not compromising is seen as the best way to do politics, which I think the direct opposite of that is true. Compromising, building coalitions between people, negotiating, that is, I think, the politics that our country needs. But it's the best of politics because that's the only way you can hold together a country that has as much diversity as our country has. And we've gone towards sort of literalism and fundamentalism. And I really think it's high time we all came back to our best pluralistic traditions.
You, in an interview with The Spectator, indicated that you were not happy a few months ago with the position that the government had on an investigation into the grooming gang scandal, and that we needed truth and reconciliation. Baroness Casey's now made a recommendation. It falls to the Home Office, of course, to implement it. Why do you think that you were right, which you were, and other ministers took a little bit of cajoling before they caught up?
Oh, yeah. I think that on the grooming gang scandal in particular, even though there have been lots of prosecutions, people have gone to jail rightly for heinous crimes, and some of them have been locked up for a very long time. And even though you've had local investigations and practice has changed in prosecution and so on, it has never felt like that moment of reckoning has actually happened. And that is because no one seems to have paid a price for looking the other way. So lots of the actual criminals have paid the price for their crimes against girls, but the officials who are supposed to look after them have not paid the price. And what's obvious to me is those people in authority, in places like Rotherham and elsewhere, I think they saw these young girls as white trash.
Yeah.
They thought they were chavscum.com, the sort of people that are an underclass, and it's very easy to dismiss them and to think that they have agency when they do not. And they've been dismissed. And so even though some of them have now seen their perpetrators, their abusers, their rapists go to jail, they still feel like justice hasn't happened.
Yeah.
One of the first by-elections that I actually was seconded to after I became an MP was the Rotherham by-election. So I actually saw firsthand, and I saw the way that Sarah Champion, excellent local Member of Parliament, was dealing with those issues. But it was obvious to me then that actually the measure of justice that is needed for what has happened is not just that the criminal justice system responds, it does need a wider societal response as well.
If you hadn't become a Member of Parliament, you could have been a supremely high-earning KC. You could be on the path to being a judge. You could be a judge now. Instead, you have to work every waking hour. You are accompanied everywhere by police officers. You don't really, except occasionally perhaps on a Friday or Saturday evening, have a moment to yourself. Knowing that, do you sometimes think, did I make a mistake going into politics? What drives you?
It's a bit late now.
I completely sympathise. But what drove you to go into politics? And do you have any regrets when you could be earning 5 times what you're earning now, and without the pressure and being in the public spotlight?
I have no regrets. I would do everything exactly the same way I have done it. And that's because, as a Muslim, I don't believe that simply doing well for myself is enough. I believe in the Islamic tradition, we believe that your life is a gift from God, but it's also a test from God. So every blessing that you have, whether it's the excellent education that I've had, a great family, an amazing country, all of those are blessings. And the question that is asked of you is, what are you going to do with those blessings? You have to earn them. You have to show God you are worthy of those blessings. And for me, that belief in life as a gift and as a test is the thing that has driven me to public service. So it's not enough. I had a great life as a barrister. I love the law. I wanted to be Kavanagh QC when I was young. And I do sometimes miss being a barrister because there's something quite exciting about being in court and advising your clients and being an active participant in the world of justice. But it's not the same as a public service you can do when you're a politician. And in this moment, where I can see so much division in the country, I feel very, very strongly that public service, for me, is where it's at. This is how I pay back all the gifts I've had, my education, my family, my country, my city, my party, in order to be a force for good in our country. And only in government do you get the chance to make decisions that can be for the betterment of millions of your fellow citizens. And for that reason, I wouldn't do it any other way.
Shabana, you mentioned George Orwell in your speech today. Why?
Oh, well, I mean, great writer, inspirational, and I've been rereading The Lion and the Unicorn recently, so his work has been much on my mind. This idea of something that can be changed utterly and yet remain the same, I think it's such a powerful way of talking about our national identity. And so much of what he writes about Englishness in particular, I think for me really, really hits home. And I've drawn a lot of inspiration from that, because if you look at Britain as it is today and compare it to the 60s, it would look so different. And yet I feel like its essential nature, its essence has remained the same. And I think there's something actually very beautiful about that. And I think our ability as a country to absorb so much difference and yet remain unchanged, it's like our superpower. And I think it makes us a really special country in the world, because there isn't anywhere else, I think, that does things the way that we do. I wouldn't want to be South Asian or a Muslim anywhere else. In this country, we have such a special arrangement between people who are different to one another. And I think Orwell really captured that in his work.
Now, some of the critics of the government's plans on ID have said they're Orwellian, and not in a good way.
I knew you were going to go there.
So obvious, wasn't it? What would you say to those people?
They're wrong. I think Orwell captured very beautifully the nature of Englishness. I might disagree with him on one or two other things. So I see I've been a long-term supporter of ID cards. So it was actually the first bill that I spoke on as a newly elected member of Parliament, the ID cards bill, where the Conservative Lib Dem coalition were ripping up the last bit of legislation that the Labour government had put in place. And over my years as a parliamentarian, particularly when I was on the Public Accounts Committee, I became very radicalised about the need for ID cards in this country. Because if you've ever watched a PAC hearing or you've ever read a Public Accounts Committee report, every single one of them says the government has designed a service, it doesn't know how many people it's for, it doesn't know who's going to use it, it can't verify who's actually allowed to access this service, and no government computer can speak to another government computer, and we waste a ton of our collective money just because we basically don't know what we're doing. And it has always amazed me that the nation of the Doomsday Book cannot run government services properly. That is actually, objectively speaking, when you think about the sort of country we've been in the past, in my worldview, insane. So I see ID cards as a reframe of the relationship between citizen and state. Of course, you have to have safeguards. You know, I don't want to. We're not living in a country where someone's going to check it every 5 minutes. The British people would reject that. There'd be mass civil disobedience. That would not work. But I think it's absolutely fine for a government to say, hang on a second, we have a bunch of services. You need to access these services. Here is a gateway of access to government services. And by the way, this helps all of us, because then you can be sure that everyone who's accessing those services is in fact entitled to them. And the biggest area in why we're starting with illegal working is because, you know, again, I see this in my constituency all the time. So many of my constituents, doesn't matter what race or what background they have, they can see people working illegally, and they say to me, I get up every day, I go to a low-paid job, but I believe in working, I've got to provide for my family, I'm doing the right thing, and they feel completely mugged off by the people that get to be in this country and work illegally. And so I think it's right that we answer the scale of that challenge, and I think a system of ID is the way forward.
But I'm going to step out of being the interrogator. That, I think, is the single best case that any government minister has made for this policy. Wouldn't you agree? Just one question briefly on economics. One of the things that Rachel Reeves has talked about in the context of securonomics is the need to recognize that when we look back at globalization, maybe we didn't think of economic growth sufficiently in terms of what is good for the British nation. And again, people from the broad blue Labour tradition have said that it's really important when you're looking at economics to think of it in a national context. Do you think that's right, and does it mean anything for the next few years of Labour economic policy?
I think it's absolutely right. What I would say is, just as nations have borders, the economies of nations therefore also have borders. That doesn't mean to say that, of course, that you turn your back on trade, that you turn your back on, you know, importing things that your country can't produce for itself that you can buy elsewhere. Of course, you know, we live in a big world. It's a global economy, and you know, we have to make sure that we're playing our full part in it for the betterment of our people. But the culture of a nation and the economics of a nation have the same borders, in my view, of the nation, right? So there has to be the ability for people in a country to see a future for themselves that isn't just, you know, you used to have a great manufacturing job and now you're going to be a delivery driver. That's nothing against delivery drivers, but it does say to people who had a skill, this is the only future that's left for you. And for delivery drivers, we've got to be able to say, you know, this is where you would start, and if you want to move forward and if you want to access other skills, you can do that in your own country. If we can't give people a sense of the work that they will be able to do, the dignity that that work will bring them, then it's no wonder that people turn their back on mainstream politics. I think globalization, this idea that you're all part in a, you know, that you're just part of the big old world, and Actually, no, nations matter. In Islam, we say that God created us into tribes so that we may know one another. And I always see that as meaning, you know, we are in different nations. Like, nations matter. The club you're born into means something emotionally to who you are, but you should want to know one another. So that's how you can be both asserting your borders, asserting your economy, asserting your culture, but also outward facing as well. And I think that's where the balance should be. I would say that the big issue of the last few decades of economics in this country, or the political economy of this country, has been it's been weighted too far towards the outside and not enough about charting a course for working class people in our own country.